Hey everyone, my name is Eric and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm sure at this point you've probably seen the increase in news about the stock market. But for those of you that haven't seen any news about that, well, it's dropping hard, coming out of one of the worst performing months that we've seen in a long time. The stock market just continues to fall lower every single day, with the S&P 500 falling 8.8% and the Dow Jones falling 5% in April, marking one of the worst monthly performances that these two market indexes have performed since March of 2020. That's right, since the beginning of the pandemic. The Nasdaq, which primarily focuses on the technology side of the stock market, is doing even worse than these two, falling a whopping 13% last month, making it one of the worst month-to-month performances since October of 2008. Remember that thing called the housing market crash? Yeah, that 2008. So why is this happening? I thought stocks were only supposed to go up. Aren't we supposed to kind of be eating chicken tendies on the moon right now? I thought good old boy Jerome Powell was supposed to keep turning that infinite money wheel and keep printing us money every single year, because it seemed to be working for the last 2 years. So why on earth is the stock market dropping harder than when Mai did when she whooped Yuta in Jujutsu Kaisen? Back to being serious, well, I can actually think of a few reasons. That infinite money printer that Jerome was powering, well, it isn't actually as infinite as we thought it was. So taking you guys on a bit of a history tour, let's go back to March of 2020. When the pandemic hit, there was a massive sell-off of US Treasuries, which in simple terms is basically a contract or agreement to loan money to the US government, which after a fixed period of time, the government would give back a little money and also a thank you note. I'm kidding about the thank you note. It's one of the safest investments to make money. And just for reference, US Treasuries can, and generally speaking, are purchased through your local bank. However, due to the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to sell off these US Treasuries just because of the pandemic, a lot of unforeseen expenditures came up. US banks unfortunately did not have enough money to buy back all of these US Treasuries that suddenly needed payment. And so the Federal Reserve, the Feds, the bank of banks, decided to step in and help and create these things called bank reserves that were swapped for US Treasuries. And that's how basically banks were able to pay off these US Treasuries that people wanted payment for. And actually, that's where the term printing money came from, which in turn the Federal Reserve actually helped ease inflation, lower interest rates, and stop the economy from going under. However, you can't just keep infinitely printing money. With this sort of infinite money printing strategy, this caused companies and individuals to basically borrow money for free because the interest rate was basically zero. The objective of this mission was for the Federal Reserve to pump enough money into the economy so that the economy would stimulate from the overdose of basically infinite money, thus causing the economy to grow, or actually to combat the pandemic. What this inadvertently causes is that the demand for certain goods increases because there's just more money in the system. However, this would be okay if the supply could keep up. And the supply was keeping up, right? You've got one of the biggest finished and unfinished goods producers in the world, China, who still continuously locks down entire provinces just because of like 1,000 people getting COVID. Oh, and there's also that ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, Russia provided 8% of US's oil imports every single year, which means oil prices are surging, and it just costs more to ship the same amount of goods across the world than it did a year ago. And this, with the combination of just there being more money in the system, well, you can kind of tell what will happen to inflation, right? Or the increase in prices or fall of the purchasing value of money. That's what inflation is. In response, the Federal Reserve decided to do one thing: raise the interest rates 6 times in a year. Similar to how the Feds did it in 2020, the objective of this mission is to do the exact opposite of what they did in 2020. By making borrowing money more expensive, companies and people will hold on to their money and not stimulate the economy anymore. This vice versa reduces the amount of money in circulation, which then, you guessed it, the demand of certain products goes down because there's just not that much money anymore, which then would cause inflation to decrease. But there's 2 slight problems with this method. Increasing interest rates means that those US Treasuries that people were so desperately selling in 2020 suddenly look pretty juicy. This means that other places in investments like the stock market or crypto, which are generally viewed as very, very volatile or very, very risky forms of investments, are suddenly bleeding out as people pull money from that and put it into the US Treasuries, which are more guaranteed. And for those of you that don't really understand, it means that rising interest rates equals rising US Treasury interest rates as well. which means you're getting more money for the same amount of money that you put in. The other issue that I mentioned before with raising interest rates is that there's less money in circulation, which means the economy isn't going to grow as much. So yeah, there you have it. There's a lot of different factors that cause the economy to go into a recession. Rising interest rates, which causes a transition of money from riskier investments to safer investments, which causes the stock market to ultimately kind of go that way. Rising interest rates means that people are borrowing less money, which means there's less money in circulation for the economy to grow. The pandemic is still running rapid in a lot of the world. Although the US seems to have just kind of like forgot about the pandemic, the rest of the world is still battling with COVID. Large supply chain networks are still being disrupted, and there's just a lot of goods that suddenly have halted or just dwindled in amount of production. And last but definitely not least, the Russian and Ukraine war, which in simple terms, Russia was a huge supplier of oil, and suddenly that's being cut off by sanctions from a lot of different areas, which means oil is suddenly more expensive. Oil being more expensive means that shipping these goods that usually cost less are suddenly costing more, which would increase the price of those products. With all of that combined, you kind of can understand why we're headed towards a recession. I mean, look at the stock market today. So buckle up, hold on. It's going to be a really, really bumpy ride as we go down. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, everyone. Peace.